He goes, the truth of it is most people misunderstand Hitler, and the people who condemn the Nazis are just jealous of them. This is JFK. Then Mussolini was the favorite of FDR. FDR says, I really like Mussolini. I'm studying that man. And FDR dispatches a whole bunch of his New Dealers to Italy to study fascism. Because he goes, we aren't there yet. We need to learn from the fascists. Now, you might think this is like one-way admiration, but no, Mussolini reviews FDR's book in an Italian journal. And Mussolini says, it's great. This guy's one of us. He's a fascist. Now, this is in the record of the 1930s. But after World War II, suddenly fascism becomes identified with Nazism and the whole. Now, in fairness, fascism in its origins had nothing to do with the Holocaust. But after the war, it does. It has that aroma of the gas chambers. So the progressive scholars move in, cleanup time, we got to go back and wipe clean the record. And so you have all these textbooks now. Not a mention. You think that if you, this is all incendiary, fascinating information, should be in our history books. You have to really look. Now, everything I'm saying, I want to be really clear, is there's not any element of controversy. I'm not making claims that are disputed by, I'm saying what actually is true. I'm simply saying it's sanitized, it's whitewashed, because this is real history. This is the actual record we'd have to contend with. And we'd have to be a little bit more careful in the things we say today if we were to be fair about it. So this is intellectual fairness and intellectual diversity. So you mentioned Sanger, and I just wanted to give you a dose of where I'm going with all this, and there'll be a lot more coming in the movie.
I'm an intern up at the State Assembly, so I had a question for you, because you've had a little bit of experience with it. So the question is in two parts. First, hard money versus soft money, and also PAC funding as well for political advertisements versus personal contributions from you, $10,000 limit, you went over it, you got dinged for it. Do you think that that's actually something that's fair or appropriate? Considering the fact that you can have individuals contributing to these PACs, they can't be controlled by the candidates directly, and that's part of the law, but nonetheless they can support them in any way that they desire. The money's unlimited, there's not really much of a cap on it. Do you think that this is probably a need to revisit the debate on hard money contributions and maybe even raising the limit, or possibly looking at closing the loophole of soft money contributions?
That's a very good question. And let me say two things. One is, I think your very question shows that, in fact, there are no limits on political contributions. In other words, what my offense was not giving 20 grand. You can go to an Obama fundraiser or a Trump fundraiser. Well, I guess Trump is funding his own, but you can go to a Cruz fundraiser, and you can write a personal check for $25,000, and they'll take it. The only difference is the check is not made to Hillary. It's made to Hillary's PAC. It's going to go to get Hillary elected, but by giving it a different name and putting the word PAC at the end, you can give unlimited contributions. People put millions of dollars into campaigns this way. So this whole idea of chasing after the guy who gave 20 grand, you can see why it's stupid, and you can see why they never do it, because they know that there's nothing to it. So in reality, unless there's corruption, like a bunch of guys get together and they say, let's fund this candidate because he will remove the tobacco tax that will enable our store, then that's corruption, and they go after that. But absent that, the idea of exceeding the limit by itself, they generally do not prosecute criminally. They may give you a civil fine or something. Now, again, if we step back and look at the whole political process, I would say that there are two very scandalous things that are happening at each end, and we only talk about one of them. So the first scandalous thing that's happening, and this began in the early 20th century, it's very hard to undo, is the basic question that was never seriously debated in America: should people who vote to have government benefits flow to themselves have the right to vote? In other words, if you think about it, there's a problem inherent in democracy. You have 100 people, and it's majority rule. So let's say that 51% of us get together, and we identify the one guy, let's call him Bill Gates, who has $50 billion, and we decide, 51% of us, that he doesn't need more than $1 billion. What the hell can he do with more than $1 billion? So we are voting to go and take $49 billion from him to use it for us, for ourselves. Now, under pure democracy, there's absolutely no prohibition to doing this. And in fact, it is supposed to be inherently just because the people voted for it. But Gates earned those dollars. Or if you think he had monopolies, use a different example. I'm talking about someone who legitimately, through business, came by their wealth. What gives the right of a majority of people to go and take their furniture and their TV and their stuff in the names that a majority of people decide to do? Where's the constitutional authority to do that? It doesn't exist. So this question, which is to say the heart of democratic politicking, I'm a community organizer, I'm going to make a coalition. And I'm going to get this coalition to vote to confiscate that guy's stuff so I can give it to that guy. This is the whole basis of democratic politics. In fact, what I think is really ingenious about all these free college proposals coming out of Bernie and Hillary is that they are actually the same idea with a twist. So Hillary's plan is $350 billion. It's not free college, but it's making college more free. Now, it may sound like a great idea, free college. But of course, college isn't actually free. Obviously, this university has to have buildings and pay teachers and stuff, so it's not free. Someone has to pay. So Hillary's point is, okay, well, the government will pay. But the government is $19 trillion in debt. The government can't pay. The government has to borrow. But who does the national debt go to? Who's it going to be handed off to? You guys. In other words, if you really look at what's going on, anybody who proposes a college program today is essentially reaching into your back pocket and taking your future earnings, borrowing it, and giving some of it to you now, and claiming that they're giving you a free education. They're not actually robbing Peter to pay Paul. They're robbing Paul to pay Paul, i.e. you. And they're hoping that you are such a sucker that you won't see that this is actually what's going on. Because what they want is they want the credit for doing it. Here's Hillary. I gave you a free college education. Oh, really? Did you dip into the coffers, the $2 billion of the Clinton Foundation, and use that to pay my tuition? Oh, no, we're not doing that. It's not my money. It's your money. It's your money. So the justice of this kind of thing needs to be, in my view, examined. So yes, it's a scandal that people have put in, vast amount of resources and distort the process, but it's being distorted in the other side too. So to me, real finance reform, real political reform would go back to square one and look at these questions at the core level. Okay?
So I'm one of those, Squid Ink professors on campus, although I'm also an immigrant from the former Soviet Union. And during the first half of your lecture, I was sort of getting comfortable. I was thinking, I'm actually less culturally relativist than a lot of my students. And I have to convince often my students, to sort of take a stance and think about what they're actually saying. But I'm also on the left, and props to whoever put leftist diversity in advertising this talk. That was a good move. I actually agree with you on some of the economic points you were making, but then things got weird to me, and there was a lot of what I see as sort of guilt by association. Say, yeah, the Democrats did this, the Democrats did that, and sure, people call themselves Democrats. People can call themselves whatever they want. What if we still had the Whigs around, right? So what I would love to hear from you is, if you are defending the Republicans of the 60s for some of them supporting the Civil Rights Act, do you want to extend the same sort of defense to today's Republicans, right, for opposing, in many cases, reproductive rights, opposing same-sex marriage? Do you see, can you speak to these modern-day debates rather than just 150 years ago?
Yes, certainly. Notice that in my talk, I did not get off the race issue. In other words, to me, the issues of gender and sexual orientation are related to race, but not identical with it. Gender is a biological category in a way that race is the painted face. The painted face is the phrase of the Southern Poverty Law Center, the basic idea is that racial differences are cosmetic. They don't actually reveal anything deep or biological above and beyond the surface. Now, gender isn't like that. I mean, the whole idea of the civil rights movement and segregation was to protest separate but equal, right? Separate but equal is segregating the races and putting them into two camps. But notice with gender, we have separate but equal all kinds. Whenever I go to Wimbledon or the US Open, separate but equal. Men play men, women play women. I don't see Federer playing against the top woman player. We segregate. And we segregate based on separate but equal prize money, but separate games. That is just a little indication that gender and race can't be completely conflated. Sexual orientation is another thing altogether. Now, my point about the Republicans is just this, that I think that the Republicans today have themselves bought into the progressive lie that they are the party of the white guy, and they are the party of the South, and they are the party that did this, and they are the party that did that. And what I'm saying is, actually, if you look at American history, if there's one group of people, I would say there's no one in America that has no reason to feel guilt about American history. But if there's any group that has the least reason to feel guilty about American slavery and American racism, it is the Republican Party. Why? Because the Republican Party ended slavery. The Republican Party passed the 13, 14, and 15 amendments. Notice that the civil rights laws all depended on those amendments. When people said you have a right to vote, it's like, where do you get the right to vote? Well, the 15th Amendment. So what happened is that the Democrats blocked those amendments for 100 years and then took the credit saying, we gave you civil rights. You didn't give civil rights. You actually allowed in the 1960s something to happen that you have been blocking for 100 years. 100 years. Now, there is no history of the Republicans doing that at all. And the Republicans tried, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, to stop it. So this is not guilt by association. This is actually guilt by identification, right? Because if I were to say Charles Manson killed all those people, you can't say, well, that's guilt by association. He did it. He did it. So I'm not saying these people are associated with those people. I'm simply saying, just as people tell America, accept American history, acknowledge that we are the present-day beneficiaries of things done in the past, I'm simply saying to the Democrats and the progressives, this is your history. This is who you are. This is what you did. Now, particularly if your whole doctrine of racial justice depends upon these things, let's begin with some moral accounting. I'll give you an example. You know Whittaker Chambers wrote the book Witness. Whittaker Chambers was a communist. He was very sympathetic to the Communist Party. But when he left it, he wrote this wrenching book about coming to terms with how he became a communist, why he felt that way. It's a tale of moral conversion. Solzhenitsyn's Gulag, the same thing. What to me is remarkable is we have all this progressivism, all this democratic history. Can you give me one account by a Democrat? Let's take Harry Byrd. Harry Byrd was in the Ku Klux Klan. He then became a leading progressive. Has Harry Byrd ever given a speech saying, you know what, when I was 25 years old, I joined the Klan. And this is why I thought the Klan was great, and this is what I got out of the Klan, and this is why I like to put on those costumes, and I still have one in my closet. But then as I grew older, I began to realize that, burning people down, setting fire to their homes, hanging them, not a very good idea. There's nothing like this. There is absolutely no moral accounting, to my knowledge, by any leading progressive or Democrat telling us what their history is and how they changed. None. So we're dealing now with, sometimes it happens in the nation's history that you've got a lacuna. And all I'm doing is putting my finger in it because we're talking about diversity. And I'm saying, let's discuss. That's all I'm saying. So I feel we probably have more in common than and you even gave some indication of that. I'm just trying to get our young people to think along these lines. Okay, let's keep going.
I'm an art student. I've read long stacks of paper in favor of Karl Marx in art classes. I've probably not read a single thing about an economist who's critical of Karl Marx in the context of an art classroom. So if people can agree that that might be a problem, a monopoly of ideas in an art classroom or an economics classroom, but they might disagree about the solution. For example, if I, as a taxpayer, say to the government, I think it's a problem that my taxes subsidize schools that do this. Do you see the potential of there being danger in government intervening to break up the monopoly of Marxism? Is there any way that government can be seen as a legitimate way of opposing this problem? Is it always a bad solution to a bad problem?
You're talking about the problem of uniformity of thinking on the campus?
Yes.
Now, look, I don't think the government should do that with any private university, right? Because that would require a frightening degree of government intervention, intellectual supervision. I don't think we want that. Now, to some degree, you have to admit for a state college, it's a totally different situation because the government is involved already. The government is already regulating the campus. The government is a source of funding for it. So, yes. Now, I would still balk at it a little bit because I don't think, for example, that a group of state legislators by themselves would be able to solve this problem. This is an intellectual problem, and this is why it's a tragedy that it isn't being solved internally, right? Because it is up to the intellectual community to see that it is not good for our education for things to be this way. Now, if you read Marx, it's not fair to say, hey, 19-year-old kid, come up with refutations of Marx. The truth of it is very smart people have spent their whole lives thinking about this stuff. And so you've got guys like Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, economists who have capable critiques of Marx. And if you were to read those, then a lot of times when you're young, you're not formulating original theories a la Kant or Hegel. You're reading ideas and going, that makes sense to me. So you need to read Marx, and then you need to read Hayek, and then you need to say, who's right? But if your professor doesn't assign Hayek and you only read Marx, then you might say, I feel something's wrong with him, but I really don't know how to say what it is. And so therefore, I'm going to sort of succumb. Let alone the fact that I know my professor thinks he's the greatest thing, and I'm going to be graded by that guy. And so my point is, all these things come into play. So that's where I think even the liberal student is being undersold a bit. Okay?
Hi, I know you really are the expert on this, but oftentimes on campus, some of my much more left-minded friends have said that they don't like Citizens United because it gives people with more money essentially more rights to a speech and political arena. How would you go against that?
At the level of principle, people can get involved politically in one of two ways. Let's look at myself. The reason that I gave money is I didn't have the time, right? In other words, I had a movie out, I had a book out. I was flying all around the country. My friend Wendy Long was like, Dinesh, can you come and speak in Westchester for me? Hey, I know these 5 Indian doctors. Will you have lunch with them? They're Indian, you're Indian, get it? You know, so all this is going on. I'm bopping around the country and I'm frustrated. I can't help her, right? So I go, okay, let me give her some money. Now, here's the point I'm trying to make. There are two types of people in this country. Forget about the Koch brothers and Soros and stuff. Let's just focus on the ordinary American. There's one group of people who have a lot of time on their hands. Case in point, old people. They have a ton of time on their hands, right? Now you have a whole bunch of other guys who are working. And so one guy may go, I'm doing nothing. I'll go hand out flyers for this political candidate for 8 hours a day. Another guy feels just as strongly. But the guy has a job, and so he goes, I'm going to take my hard-earned money, which, by the way, if you think about it, represents labor. I'm a foreman on a dock. I worked hard. I earned that dough. And I'm going to give that money to my candidate, representing my similar degree of commitment to this person, but I'm not doing it by handing out flyers. I'm doing it by giving 8 hours of wages. Now, there's no difference between that I see. Both people are giving what they have, one in time and the other in money, which represents time. Money is time, right? You're paid by the hour. You're paid by the month. Your money represents your time. So that doesn't solve the problem of the guy who's giving $10 million. Now see, at one time in American politics, the Republican Party was the party of the rich. That is no longer true. Both parties are harvesting the same amount of dough from wealthy people. So at the very least, we have a level playing field among very rich people funneling a lot of cash into both sides. You want to stop it? Work on it. I just feel like that is not something that is our core problem. It is our core problem to the degree that it's difficult, for example, for a non-incumbent to run against an incumbent, because the incumbent has the built-in structure of contributors and so on. So lots of problems in our politics, but to my way of thinking, that's not the biggest one.
Hi, so I'm a history and political science student here, and one question that I sort of had based off of your economic model was that you based it upon a perfect libertarian society where everybody starts off with equal opportunity, but that is not the case in America. Obviously, we see a large wage disparity, we see opportunity disparity, and your model just doesn't work in real life. So how do you reconcile that with the reality of American politics, American life, and American culture?
So what you're saying is that in a perfect world, there would be exact equality of opportunity. The social circumstances and opportunities that are enjoyed by each person would be identical. In a perfect world. I want to suggest to you why that would actually be, strangely enough, the worst and least perfect world of all. Because all of us, our abilities, our hard work, our talent is a combination of two things. Let's call it genes plus society. Society includes socialization. It's all the social influences. So genetics plus social influences equals you, equals me, right? Now, if we could equalize the second, we equalize all social influences and their influences in effect zero, because they don't explain any differences among humans. We remove them altogether. Then all human differences would be, by your logic, 100% genetic. Our society would be a completely stratified genetic society in which people would receive rewards in direct proportion to their biological inheritance. In a sense, it would be a certain kind of racism, but not about race. It would simply mean that nothing other than genes would matter at all. And in fact, all human effort would be worthless, because essentially the genetic lottery would decide whether you're going to be a millionaire or whether you're going to be broke, right? So the reason that's worth thinking about is not because I'm trying to flummox, even though we say things like, I believe in equal opportunity. Most of us don't really. I mean, I've got a 21-year-old daughter. Why am I sending her to Dartmouth? If I really believe in equality of opportunity, I would try to give her the same education as every other kid. I would submit none of your parents believe in equality of opportunity. That's why they're sending you here. Why would they put extra effort? Why would you put extra effort into getting here? If you didn't think that going and getting an education here is going to give you a leg up than if you went to the community college down the street. So the point I'm trying to make is freedom militates against equality of opportunity. We are all trying in a free society, ourselves and for our kids, to give them an edge so that they will be competitively advantaged compared to everyone else. So the real question you have to ask is it the job of the government to take the hard work that people and their parents put in to invest in their own kids and undo that? Because the government can undo it. The government can say, your dad was a doctor and studied hard to go to med school, and your mom worked 2 jobs, and so your collective incomes enabled you to go to private school and then come here. We, the government, are going to make sure that you don't have the slightest advantage over some other kid whose parents didn't do that. And I say, is that fair? Should the government actually have that kind of power? Why is it just for the government to do that? This represents the hard effort of people who chose to then invest it in you. And is it the government's right to say that they shouldn't do that? Or that the government will now provide free private education to other kids who don't have those resources available because their parents didn't provide them? I don't know the answer to all that. I certainly believe in a safety net. I believe in giving poor kids economic opportunity. I got scholarships to go to Dartmouth. So I'm very grateful for all that. But it just helps us to reflect on what we actually mean by justice. And we don't want to undo the operations of a free society in the name of imposing some geometric system of justice on it.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the Voting Rights Act and their pre-clearance requirements that used to exist before the Supreme Court struck them down. That was established in a time when the Dixiecrats, the old Southern Democrats, ran the southern states and did all they could to stop African Americans from voting. Now, what they did, they didn't say that whenever the Democrats pass a law that it has to be pre-cleared by a federal court. They said when that state does it. And you talk about all the smart people here. You also talk about how race is merely cosmetic. Aren't you insulting all the intelligent people here and the 80% of African Americans who are Democrats by claiming that the current Democratic Party has anything to do with that Dixiecrat party from 50 years ago that was trying to stop them from voting? Aren't you conflating the word Democrat with progressive? They have utterly nothing to do with each other. The current Democratic Party has absolutely none of those values from 50 years ago, and you're pretending that they are guilty of something. Aren't you trying to claim that Jesse Jackson is a dupe and shouldn't be supporting the Democratic Party because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican and freed the slaves?
Let me try to tackle that very frontally. First of all, probably the biggest thing going for the big switch that I mentioned earlier are two facts, both of which are very powerful. The first is that whites in the South, who used to be Democrats, do now predominantly vote Republican.
Yep.
Right? Fact number two is that blacks who used to vote Republican now vote overwhelmingly Democratic.
Yep.
And operating on the assumption, which I think is reasonable, that people understand where their own interests lie, it would certainly be right that blacks currently see their identification and their interest in the Democratic Party. Now, here are two interesting questions to ask. Number one, when did blacks switch from being Republicans to being Democrats? The Democratic Party was the party of the Dixiecrats all the way through the 60s. And if what you say is true, that the blacks made a switch to their racial friends, it would appear that the black switch would have to come in the 70s and 80s, when blacks see these racists are now moving over there, so it makes sense for us to move over here. But in reality, blacks moved overwhelmingly to the Democratic Party in the 1930s. The black vote went from about 15% Democratic to about 70% Democratic within 4 years.
In the places they could vote.
That's right, but
which was the North.
Also in the
Jackie Robinson was a Republican for darn good reason.
That's absolutely right. But here's what I'm getting at.
You wouldn't be today.
Well, we can debate Jackie Robinson because it's always difficult to know what dead people would say. If Martin Luther King were alive today, Martin Luther King isn't alive today. Okay, but here's the point I'm getting at. The reason that blacks switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party had everything to do with the benefits of the New Deal and nothing to do with racism. In fact, yes, and in the South, too, blacks switched to the Democratic Party. It's not that blacks couldn't vote in the South. They said there were all kinds of barriers to black voting. Under FDR, there was blacks couldn't vote in the South at all. No blacks voted in the South.
Very, very few.
How many?
Absolutely.
How many?
I don't know.
Okay. I thought so. Look, there were all kinds of poll taxes and barriers imposed by the Democrats on the black vote until the Democrats realized that they could get the black vote by offering jobs, welfare, retirement programs. Are you telling me that FDR in the South was telling blacks who were voting for the Democrats, you can't vote? Not true. Not true. Blacks in the North and the South switched to the Democratic Party because of New Deal benefits. Many of them were very sad about doing it because they were leaving the party of emancipation and Lincoln and flinging themselves into the party of the Ku Klux Klan and the Dixiecrats who were in the South. and were in the Democratic Party.
Completely different thing.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is it was a Faustian bargain in which you get economic benefits and at the same time you're in bed with the racists and you're on your own team. And I'm saying that's American history. Now, whites began to switch to the Republican Party, but much later. Whites began to switch to the Republican Party in droves in the 70s and 80s. Now, here's the point. If you look at racial opinion in the South, and there's a voluminous body of data on this, as racism in the South dramatically declines, the Southern identification with the Republican Party begins to increase. There's an opposite track. Racism is declining in the South, and whites begin to move to the Republican Party. In fact, two scholars who've written a book about this trace that the least racist Southerners all became Republicans. That the racist, the poor white, the South became less agrarian, more prosperous, industry came to the South, the post-industrial society, the Republican appeal of equal opportunity, free markets, prosperity, appealed to Southerners, and that's why they... So what I'm getting at is that the progressives have sold the South on a guilt trip. Even this whole thing about, you know, the Civil War was really about slavery and the South did slavery. Wait a minute. Again, the Northern Democrats protected slavery. The Civil War, the fight over slavery was between the Democrats... False.
I mean, you're holding up strong Thurman as a model.
No.
He's exactly the same guy as...
Got jobs and moved out. They would no longer be beholden to you. That's not a very good situation, and it bears an uncanny resemblance to the policies.
Hi. So first, I just want to thank you for being here because I definitely agree that we today usually surround ourselves with people who have the same ideas as us, and that's a very dangerous thing. That said, I thought the lecture was very interesting, and I had a lot of questions, but I brought it down to just one that I thought was interesting. So when you think about different countries and progressive and regressive taxes, what are your ideas about countries that have a significantly lower tax rate for capital gains? In other words, people like Steve Jobs who have amazing ideas, and how that plays into the unfairness of maybe taxing someone too much if they deserve that money, like you said.
The problem with our scheme of taxes is it doesn't apply, I would call it a uniform rule of fairness. Now, uniform rules are always defective. They're never perfect, right? Consider a uniform rule, the speed limit. The speed limit is actually a very unfair rule. Why? Because some people can drive safely at 75 and other people are unsafe at 40, right? So true justice, platonic justice, would require that the cop simply observes the driver and decides if he or she is driving safely. No speed limit. That would be the best. But in a liberal society, we don't trust power to do that because we know that people are corrupt and people have all kinds of incentives, and the cop may go, that guy's driving a Mercedes, I'll show him. You know, so because of all this, we say, all right, we'll all agree to live by the same rule. It's not a perfect rule, 65 speed limit, at least in a normal zone. Now, I would submit that taxes are like that. In other words, that once you start fooling with the tax rate, all kinds of people will come in and make special petitions. Hey, we're the ones who are creating jobs. Give us a 10% rate because after all, we are the entrepreneurs. Another guy goes, well, you know what? I need to pay only 4%. That guy needs to pay 70%. I would submit that the best way to solve this whole problem is proportional taxation. Now, here's the beauty of that. If you have proportional taxation, it means everybody pays at the same rate. What is that rate? It's set democratically. The ordinary guy can go, I'm really upset, the government needs more revenue, we need to double the taxes. Okay, but that means that you, buddy, are going to be paying double. You were paying 15%, you're now going to pay 30%. But you're not allowed to raise taxes on other people without raising them on yourself as well. That's going to remove the incentive of people reaching into somebody else's pocket. So, in other words, even though it's not a perfect system either, it's like the speed limit, it is to me the least imperfect of all the systems. And you can set that rate where you want. I would personally set it around 15% because I think that's if you're making $1 and you pay 15 or 20 cents in taxes, that's pretty much fair. And I don't really care. You can start it at $50,000 or $40,000 so you're not taxing the guy who's living in a homeless shelter. But you set a floor, and above it you set a proportional tax rate, and you set it. And then people can debate it, and they can lower the rate or increase the rate, and the government needs more money. But the whole point is the whole floor rises together, or the whole floor comes down together. And then people say, we want to get over the divisiveness of our society. Well, this is the way to do it. Because any government that robs Peter to pay Paul can always count on Paul's support. And that's one of the problems with our system now. The divisiveness is created by the fact that people feel that other people are using their votes to take away your stuff. And I don't see, without any defense of it or any explanation of why that's right. So that's my brief answer. Let's take the last question. Yes, sir.
Well, first, thank you very much for coming to see us here in the People's Republic of Madison. And just so you know, I binge watched all your videos on YouTube in preparation for this event. And my question is, we've had a couple, or I guess several, what they call hate and bias incidents on campus this year. And then there's a big uproar about that, and then the administration starts, I mean, you know how it works. And then they've just had the latest march, and they're asking the administration to resign. They're different administrators. There's way too many administrators, but they're asking them to resign, and I'm just wondering, in light of Mizzou and Yale, what your take is on those events and the kind of, I would argue, disproportionate response we see, and everyone needs to resign because we didn't get something we think. Anyway, yeah, that's my question.
Well, number one, you know, I have a sort of ambivalent view of people's republics because interestingly, people's republics tend to be kind of interesting places to live. They tend to have really good coffee shops. They tend to have pretty good ethnic food, including Indian food. One of my complaints about Red America is that the food sucks. The intellectual and cultural life is pretty good in people's republics. But, so, you know, it's a little puzzle to me, the homogenous leftism that comes out of that, because it actually is incongruous with a lot of the economic vitality that's often in a town like Madison or Ann Arbor. This would be true of Austin, Texas as well. So that's a puzzle. What you're talking now is about a certain kind of mob mentality that I actually think is the enemy of justice, because it doesn't really matter what the merit of the issue is. The issue can never be fairly adjudicated in this environment. And this is just as true about the Black Lives Matter incidents that have occurred around the country. What will happen is you have an ambiguous incident. Some guy gets shot. Now, it isn't the fact that a guy got shot, or even the fact that it's a black guy, because black guys are shot every day all over the country, and mostly they're shot by other black guys. And there's not one word from Black Lives Matter on this topic. So clearly, all black lives don't matter. The black lives that matter is black lives shot by white cops. That is a very small subset of the group. Now, when that happens, we play a certain kind of a ritual in which the police chief has to resign and the administration has to resign. Now, notice I'm not going where you think I'm going to go, which is, why should they resign? They're actually doing a great job. Truthfully, if it were up to me, I would ask most of the people in your administration here to resign. But for totally other reasons. They're actually doing a terrible job. Administrators are the most craven, unreliable, opportunistic, unimaginative, bureaucratic people you can imagine. Not just here, everywhere. It's a mindset. And it's a very unhealthy mindset, and it's actually antagonistic to true learning. So to the degree that that is the problem, the progressives are right. There's something wrong with this administration. But it's not really that, because if this administration were removed, another one would take its place that would be identical. Notice, by the way, in these inner cities where all these shootings occur, the mayor is black, the police chief is very often black, the whole establishment is black, not in Ferguson, Missouri, but that's why I was speaking as a generality, because the inconvenient fact is that a lot of these inner cities are now run by black Democrats. That's the establishment in the inner city. It may not be true in Ferguson, but it's true in Baltimore, it's true in St. Louis, it's even true in Houston. So the point I'm trying to get at is, if it never seems to occur to anyone, it never seems to occur to Jesse Jackson to hold protests outside of inner city schools and demand that the black superintendent resign, that the black police chief resign, that the black mayor resign, that the whole Democratic establishment that has kept this place poor for 50 years resign. That never happens. Why not? I would submit the reason for it is that these guys, Sharpton, Jackson, they don't care about any of that. Their whole point is a whole racial tableau has been established by the civil rights movement. We have to now lie and wait for an incident that resembles that so we can then move into action. Because all we're doing is reenacting the old play. The old play needs a cast of characters. Now suddenly, if it turns out that there are 10 city officials and they're all black, everyone will go, what the hell? This doesn't fit our framework, turn off the TV. Go home, Jesse Jackson. He knows that. He already knows that. So he needs a sucker. He needs victims. He needs a racial setup that fits the 60s. He needs Bull Connor. Now, Bull Connor was a Democrat. Orville Faubus, the governor of Arkansas, who stood in the schoolhouse door and blocked black kids from getting in, he was a Democrat. So all these segregationists were Democrats, every single one of them. Little fact that's kind of erased from history, but nevertheless, there it is. Okay, he knows about it, but he doesn't think it really matters. Yes, okay. There's nothing to do with it. Yes. The whole structure of democratic authority in the South, nothing to do with any of this. So, okay. Now, look. This is a complicated topic, and in fairness, these are tough issues. The progressivism of today is not the same as the progressivism of Margaret Sanger. But my point is, it grew out of it and is connected to it. So in other words, I would put it this way. Margaret Sanger was solving a problem. There are lots of useless people in our society. What do we do with them? And her solution was, we kill them. Or we prevent them from being born in the first place. Modern progressivism says there are lots of useless people in our society. Margaret Sanger called them breeders. They're breeders, and we've got to deal with them. And I would suggest that the modern Democrats say, we have a solution to this problem. We will make them breeders of votes. We will make them Democrats. So the point I'm getting at is that the old progressivism and the new aren't the same, but they are dealing with the same problem, and their solutions bear an uncanny similarity to each other. That's why the old progressivism grew so seamlessly out of the old one. To give you one example of what I mean. And this is a history that you can check out yourself. I recommend a book by Ira Katznelson called Fear Itself. Katznelson is a historian at Columbia. Here's what he says. He goes, when FDR came in with the New Deal, FDR realized I cannot get the New Deal through if I don't have the support of the Southern Democrats. So FDR went to the Southern Democrats and said, I want you to vote for the New Deal. I'm going to give you all kinds of benefits. I'm going to build the Tennessee Valley Authority. I'm going to pour all this economic blessings into the South. Vote for it. The Southern
Democrats said, blacks must be cut out of most New Deal programs. No Social Security for blacks, no housing loans for blacks. FDR agreed. And the New Deal legislation was drawn up to cut blacks out of Social Security, FHA loans, all kinds of jobs and New Deal programs. Many of them were segregated. FDR cut this Faustian bargain with the Southern Democrats. Number two, the Southern Democrats told FDR, we have a second condition for you. You must never allow an anti-lynching law to pass through the Congress while you are the president. FDR agreed again. And anti-lynching laws were proposed by Republicans starting in the early 1930s. Throughout the FDR administration, he blocked every single one of them. Now, this is the leading progressive of the 20th century.
This is the great hero of the Democratic Party. Well, there were some other heroes. Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was basically responsible for the revival of the Ku Klux Klan in the early part of the 20th century. All right, and then Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson, another guy, started out as a segregationist. And then later in his career, Lyndon Johnson has frequently used the N-word. He basically talked about keeping blacks on the Democratic plantation. This is all in Doris Kearns Goodwin's books. Here's what I'm getting at. The three leading progressives of the 20th century: Woodrow Wilson, FDR, Lyndon Johnson. All three of them were either outright racists or in bed with the racists.
All dead 40 years ago or more.
Yes, and yet there is the Roosevelt dinner that the Democrats have today. The Democrats lionize these guys. They're the heroes of the Democratic Party. Their names are invoked in every convention. Okay, so to conclude, our country has a complex history. We're not going to do all that today. My goal here is to say to you, keep an open mind, a truly open mind. Don't buy into the slogans of diversity any more than you would buy into the old slogans. Keep critical thinking, and at the end of the day, you will have that intellectual liberation that is a true hallmark of diversity. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.